Hello, my name is Marila Mensch. I work for the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies. Welcome to the Coronavirus Diaries, makes a special series on human rights and the geopolitical impact of the global pandemic. Today, I'm delighted to talk to Jakub Kalensky, who is a fellow at the Atlantic Council. And he focuses a lot on disinformation, and in this capacity, you kind of help raise awareness about disinformation, especially these days, which I think it's particularly important. So, Jakub, welcome.
Hello, pleased to be here.
Can you please tell us a little bit, perhaps introduce yourself, introduce your work and what you do at the Atlantic Council?
So in the Atlantic Council, I'm part of the Digital Forensic Research Lab. Our mission is to explain and expose disinformation wherever it may appear. And within the DFRLab, I'm responsible for external contributions. So apart from our own research and apart from what our own researchers are covering, I'm trying to have articles from other experts from all over the world who are covering topics that we can't cover, for example, because of not enough language capacities or regional capacities. So I'm trying to have articles from regions that we can't cover. And I'm also writing pieces that are more like analytical or commentary, like rather than the case studies and research that my colleagues are covering.
I see. Yeah. First, like in general terms, why do you think we should pay attention to disinformation and propaganda narratives about the coronavirus used by different actors? Why is it important to perhaps stop the pandemic or make things a little bit better?
I think these it's exactly these crisis events that show us how important it is to pay enough attention to organize the disinformation campaigns. Just the most recent article we have, Russian Telegram rumor claiming smoking protects from coronavirus spreads to Ukraine. We see that the #1 information criminal, which currently is in the Kremlin, and it is the Russian information ecosystem, is deliberately spreading lies about the virus, about the origin of the virus, blaming that it was the United States who actually invented this virus and are spreading it. But I have even seen articles blaming Latvians for producing this virus. So you can see that they are blaming everyone else. And here in this particular case, they are lying about what will help you to cure the virus. And it's really a big difference if you are protecting yourself against the virus based on facts or based on fabrications and disinformation and lies. So we can see that disinformation can really threaten people's lives, and it is exactly events like this that remind us of that.
There's a recent European Union report that mentioned that pro-Kremlin media have basically mounted a significant disinformation campaign aimed specifically at Europe. Who are the actors in this field? Are there fringe media? Where are they present on social media and other forms of media?
So the ecosystem spreading pro-Kremlin disinformation is really enormous, and it's not only the fringe media, although they are also a crucial part of this. But I think we can see a development that would be more like top-down approach, and we can also see bottom-up approach. The top-down approach is really, you could imagine the beginning as being the regular Friday meetings in the Kremlin, where the Kremlin officials are giving instructions to the pseudo-media what they should lie about. So this week you will say that Ukrainians are fascists, that MH17 was shot down by everybody else except Russia, that we have no civilian casualties in Syria, and that it is Britain to blame for Skripal poisoning, etc., etc. And you would have the big TV shows that are, the most important ones are on Sunday evening, on Россия 1 and on Первый канал, and then on other TV channels. And the narratives that you see on Sunday evening, you would see them throughout the week in the smaller TV shows, in the print media. And then from this Russian system, it will be spreading via the language, via the various mutations of Sputnik and Russia Today into other languages. And you might think that, I don't know, the Polish version of Sputnik is not an enormously popular website. It is not, but there is precisely the ecosystem of these fringe websites and of the blog sites that are parroting the narratives that are spread via the Polish version of Sputnik. And then through that, it penetrates to the social media, who are an important amplifier, and whereas Facebook and Twitter might be the most important in the English language sphere, it might be Vkontakte that is more important in some other languages. It might be Weibo in China. So that would be the top-down approach. But then we can definitely see some activity that would be more bottom-up. And you can see that since there is demand at the top for disinformation activities, you can see that the lower levels are kind of offering their disinformation narratives. And there is a huge competition in the lower levels, which disinformation may succeed. And those pieces of disinformation that are the most successful, then they get amplified by the bigger Russian media, and sometimes they can even penetrate to the top. So we have, for example, seen this famous Lisa case. I think people who follow disinformation in Europe will be quite familiar with that. That was in 2016 in Germany. A little girl, I believe she was 13 years old, from a Russian-speaking family in Germany. She didn't come home one night. She invented a story that she was raped by migrants. When the police asked her for questioning, she admitted that she made it up. It was a lie, and in fact, she was with her boyfriend. But the Russian language blog sites immediately picked the story up, amplified it into narrative. The German government is hiding the problems with the refugees, and refugees are raping underage girls here in Germany, and the government is covering it up. And we could precisely see that it started on the blog sites and in the social media, and only later it got amplified by the important Russian state TV channels like Первый канал, and only later it was Sergei Lavrov himself, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who accused Angela Merkel of making light of the problem with the refugees. So you could see that there are various approaches, but the ecosystem of the that is spreading this pro-Kremlin disinformation, it would be the state media, it would be the fringe websites, it would be some Facebook groups. It's actually quite enormous.
Okay, and when did you see specifically about the coronavirus? When did you see the conspiracy theories emerge, and how have they kind of evolved over time? Because we are also looking at the case of China, and China's narrative is really changing. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So my ex-colleagues in Brussels, they have actually traced the first piece of disinformation, I believe it was 20th or 22nd of January. And if I remember correctly, it was one of the versions of Sputnik that was claiming that the COVID-19 virus is actually a US biological weapon. It's quite funny that this is precisely the narrative that we have seen being spread by the Russian media in the past 7 decades. Wherever there was a new virus, they immediately accused the US. This is a US biological or chemical weapon, and it tries to eradicate some segments of the population. So this is something that we actually know from the Soviet/Russian propaganda quite well. And so by the end of January, it was only in the Russian state media, and we have this Czech company called Semantic Visions. They are tracing. Oh, my cat is doing exactly the same. So don't get surprised if she comes. We have this company called Semantic Visions, and they are analyzing open source intelligence. They are able to see 90% of news sources all over the internet, and they have traced that exactly these Russian narratives that were spread by the end of January were later picked up by official Chinese propaganda. So Chinese disinformation channels used basically the same information that the Russian disinformation channels were spreading earlier. And later the story got picked up, for example, by Czech disinformation outlets. But we would see it just this morning. The EU versus Disinfo project published the fresh disinformation review, and there I believe they highlighted like 8 various language mutations of the Sputnik spreading these kinds of conspiracies. So you can see that they are really trying to spread it through as many languages as possible.
Yeah, I read yesterday as well that Iran is also slowly jumping on that bandwagon and using also that conspiracy theory of bioweapons or something that, you know, the Americans have done to foreign countries.
I have to admit I haven't noticed that, but I can't say I'm surprised. It's we do see that the disinformation actors are learning from each other, picking up each other's tactics, and sometimes even spreading exactly the same messages. So it is something that we see in the information space happening quite a lot, and especially in the last 2 years, we would see that. I think it's us to blame that there are now more actors using precisely this kind of weapons, because we in the West we have basically proven that the aggressors can use these weapons with impunity. We are not punishing it at all. We are talking about how to raise our own media literacy, but this is kind of our own internal solution. But we are not saying, you know, you are spreading disinformation, you are trying to undermine our democracies, so we will punish you for that. There has been only one incident that I can recall, and that was the indictment of Robert Mueller and the punishment of those who were involved in the interference in 2016 elections in the United States. But since then, I haven't seen anything like that. And especially here in Europe, there have been at least 14 or 16 various elections and referenda targeted by Russian disinformation, and not a single country has decided to do something similar as the Americans. So we are basically showing to the Russians that, and to any other potential aggressor, that we do not defend against this kind of aggression. So we can't be surprised that there are now more actors who are using exactly the same techniques.
Yeah. Usually disinformation is aimed at both national and international kind of audiences. Are you seeing, how is disinformation right now in Russia, for example, depending, you know, I know that they probably have quite a number of coronavirus cases, but how much is being hidden and how much is the Kremlin's propaganda impacting the situation on the ground?
So the messaging I have seen that's directed inwards in Russia, that's a lot about have a look how the West is basically dismantling itself. Nothing works there. There is no more EU. You see that borders are being closed, so Schengen doesn't work, EU doesn't work, etc. And have a look at us. We are coping with it so well. We have basically no problems at all. So it's this ancient narrative of strong Russia and weak West. You know, they are basically, they are almost all dead, and we are superior and we can cope with the situation better. So this is the chief narrative I have seen. About the impact, this is really hard to say. We would need to see some opinion polls.
But
there were,
like,
for example,
if there are a lot of cases in Russia, people are probably going to the hospital or they're seeing other sick people. It's something that's visible usually, you know, so that's why it's like, I'm not sure how much of an impact it can have if you can see a lot of people lining up at the hospital.
I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure that the people in Russia who see that there are people in the hospital, that they are aware that it might be the COVID virus. Or so on one hand, it's about will they have the right numbers? Will they know that? I have seen some numbers. cases of pneumonia have increased in Russia. So maybe the people think it's just pneumonia, it's no COVID. Right? So on one hand, it might be this, and on the other hand, it might be, okay, so maybe we are not perfect, but have a look in the West, it's much worse. So we are still good off, we are still fine. So it's really hard to say. I think in this case, we would really need to have some well-targeted opinion polls that would show us what is the real impact. Something like, do you think that Canada has a worse problem with the COVID virus than Russia? And there we would see the answers. The opinion polls in the past, they have shown us that the disinformation campaign that's targeted at the Russians can be enormously effective. There are numbers like 80 to 90% of Russians believing that it was Ukraine to blame for shooting down MH17. So you can see that this disinformation campaign within Russia can be enormously effective. I haven't seen some recent opinion poll that would be targeted towards the messaging about the virus, so I don't know. I don't know. We would need to see some numbers.
Yeah, you were saying earlier that in terms of international audiences, the aim is really to discredit, organizations like NATO or Western institution, or in the US, really saying democratic institutions aren't working there, don't trust the media. And I think over the past few years, we've really seen across Europe and North America as well, kind of a lack of trust in institutions. So is the Russian, that kind of Russian propaganda now specifically going to have a, is the goal the exact same, and what kind of impact can it have or trust in institutions?
This is the trouble when you have like 2 or 3 factors that are going in the same vector. Which one of them is actually the most impactful? We don't know. We would need to divide what would be the trust into our democratic institution without the Russian influence, but we can't measure it because the Russian influence is there. So we can't, unfortunately, I don't know about a method how to separate these influences from one another and measure. Here they are using something that is already present, which is brilliant. They can only amplify it. So it's like, we are not to blame for it. They just use what's already present. It's true that you will always have some part of the audience that will refuse to trust mainstream media. It's all a conspiracy of the elites and the mainstream media. They are in it with them, and it didn't happen like this at all. You will always have some part of an audience that will be like that. But now we have some malicious actors who are using this audience, and they are also feeding it strategic narratives like undermining the EU, undermining NATO, or undermining the whole idea of democracy. So again, I will not tell you precisely what is the impact, like percentage-wise.
Yeah, it's only going to be in the long term. But you also mentioned, what I find interesting, you also mentioned in one of your articles that the pro-Kremlin propaganda, they're also learning a lot by doing these operations. They're also learning a lot about their audiences for kind of future disinformation operations, and I found that really interesting.
Absolutely. It is actually very similar to when they violate, for example, the airspace. They are doing it quite often in the Baltic states or in Scandinavian states. The aim is actually not to attack the other country, Finland or Estonia. The aim is to see how your defense works. What mechanisms are triggered?
Test the ground.
What does it precisely? What does it look like when we attack? What does it look like? And if you would want to do that for real, then you would know what defense is awaiting you. And this is actually similar. You might sometimes just test the reaction system of the information ground you are attacking. I actually genuinely believe that the Colombia chemical hoax in 2014, that was precisely one of these testing balloons. How does the disinformation spread? Who are the people who are retweeting it? Who are the people countering it? Because if you know that, I don't know, newsroom A or or researcher X is going to debunk your disinformation, then you can discredit him or her. No, don't trust this guy. He's just a Western warmonger and stuff like that. So you can actually learn quite a lot from just conducting these operations. You can see, if you see that it's Fox News who will be happily multiplying conspiracy theories, then obviously you will be trying to engage these guys to, I don't know, write flattering replies to their tweets. This is the easiest way.
Yeah. Do you have any report coming out soon? Something else that you're working on right now about this specifically, or pro-Kremlin propaganda in general?
So just a fresh one. I think it's very important. It's online since yesterday, and that's about the Russian Telegram rumor claiming smoking protects from coronavirus, that it's already spreading. I think that's really important, showing that they are spreading lies that might cost lives. This is really very dangerous.
Some of the craziest theories about how to cure this, you know, the warm water and some chemicals, it's really dangerous.
This is precisely dangerous. And then one piece we have in the pipeline is that's authored by the Czech company, the Semantic Visions, and they are the guys who show that according to their data, it was really the Russian channels that were the first ones to introduce the conspiracy theory that it is a US-made or man-made virus, and so they are showing the precise point number 1 or point 0 from which it all started spreading. So
that's also really interesting, because we have now seen China adopt that narrative as well, and then we are going to have, you know, Iran and perhaps India will be next, because I know conspiracy theories in India have also been kind of pretty active. So we'll have to see. It seems like these networks are kind of working together.
It's always hard to find whether there is some tangible synergy, or whether it's just convergence of interests. That's always
more convergence than rather, you know, really working together. It's just that they, you know,
but for example, in the case of Russia and China, we know that Russian state media and Chinese state media, they have exchange programs, and they are there we really have formalized trainings. And researchers focusing on China, I have read one interesting article, I believe it was by the Institute for Study of War, or I hope I'm not mistaken, and they were writing that recently, like the past 12 or 18 months, we could see that Chinese propaganda is becoming a bit more like the Russian one. It's not only about saying that Russia is great or China is great, but it's also about denigrating your opponents. And that it didn't used to be the case, like, for example, 2 years ago. So we can actually see that some formalized training is there, but in other cases, we don't have the information. Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Well, Jacob, thank you so much, and thank you for your great work. I think it's more important than ever. I know here in Canada, we have a lot of experts working on debunking all conspiracy theories and disinformation every day, and they have a lot of work right now. So I want to thank you for coming on this podcast, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks a lot for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.